Imagine a world where entire civilizations vanished overnight, where rising waters swallowed mountains and cities alike, where the course of human history was rewritten forever. Today, we dive into a story lost in the mists of time, the Great Flood that reshaped our world 12,000 years ago. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might challenge everything you thought you knew about human history. And before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss our journey into the forgotten past. 12,000 years ago, the Earth was a drastically different place. We are talking about the period often referred to as the end of the last ice age. The planet was emerging from a long, harsh glacial period. Enormous ice sheets covering vast swathes of North America, Europe, and Asia. Sea levels were far lower than today, revealing land bridges that connected continents. Humanity, still mostly hunter-gatherers, was spread thin across this harsh environment. They lived in small communities, relying on hunting, fishing, and primitive agriculture. But something extraordinary was brewing. Ancient geological evidence, sediment layers, and oceanic core samples indicate a sudden, massive deluge, one that cannot simply be explained by gradual climate change. This wasn't a seasonal flood or a local disaster. This was global, and it left behind traces so powerful that scientists today still debate the exact cause. When we talk about the Great Flood of 12,000 years ago, we're not exaggerating. Imagine water levels rising hundreds of feet in some regions, sweeping away entire ecosystems, reshaping coastlines and erasing evidence of ancient cities. Some researchers suggest that this event may have submerged large portions of what we now call the North Sea, the Persian Gulf, and coastal areas along the Mediterranean and South America. But what triggered such a catastrophic event? Was it a comet striking the ice sheets? Was it a rapid melting caused by sudden warming? Or was it a combination of both, amplified by tectonic activity and massive glacial collapses? As we uncover each layer of evidence, the picture becomes increasingly complex and astonishing. Interestingly, myths and legends from various cultures seem to echo the memory of a catastrophic flood. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to the Noah story in the Hebrew Bible and even the flood myths of ancient India and Mesoamerica, there are striking similarities. Could these legends be the cultural memory of a real event? Scholars argue that while the stories were passed down and embellished over millennia, the core event, a sudden, overwhelming flood, could be factual. Archaeologists have found submerged settlements off the coasts of India, Japan, and Europe, dating back to the end of the last ice age. These sites suggest that people lived along what were once now submerged coastlines, only to be wiped out or forced to migrate by rapidly rising seas. Modern science has begun to piece together the story. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica show sudden spikes in meltwater. Geological surveys reveal layers of sediment consistent with a massive influx of water. Evidence even suggests that multiple meltwater pulses occurred within a relatively short period, enough to trigger massive tsunamis and disrupt ecosystems worldwide. One particularly compelling theory involves the collapse of the Laurentide ice sheet in North America. This massive ice sheet, covering much of modern-day Canada and the northern United States, began melting rapidly around 12,900 years ago. The meltwater suddenly released could have caused an unprecedented surge in ocean levels and triggered a chain reaction of floods across the globe. For the humans living during this time, the consequences would have been devastating. Communities dependent on predictable river systems and fertile lands suddenly found themselves facing catastrophic conditions. Crops failed, animals migrated or died, and entire populations were displaced. This forced migration likely led to the collapse of early settlements and the emergence of new ones in safer areas. It may even explain the sudden gaps in archaeological records from this period, where entire civilizations may have simply vanished under the rising waters. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could one flood be global? Well, it wasn't just a simple flood, it was a perfect storm of geological and astronomical events. In upcoming chapters, we will explore the shocking evidence of comet impacts, the tectonic upheavals that may have amplified the disaster, and the ancient technology and knowledge that vanished with the waters. So, if you want to unravel the mystery of the world's most catastrophic flood, stick around, because in the next chapter, we'll journey to the icy regions of the past and uncover what scientists have found beneath the glaciers. Secrets frozen in time that tell the story of this ancient deluge. And as we go deeper into this forgotten history, remember to like this video, share it with friends who love mysteries of the past, and subscribe to my channel for more incredible explorations into our ancient world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The Great Flood of 12,000 years ago didn't just reshape coastlines. It reset civilization itself. Entire societies were forced to adapt, migrate, or perish. And yet, even in the midst of such devastation, humanity survived, carrying forward the memory of a world that once was, hidden beneath the oceans and in the myths we still tell today. The world at the end of the last ice age was precariously balanced. Vast ice sheets, sometimes miles thick, covered much of the northern hemisphere. In North America, the Laurentide ice sheet stretched across most of Canada and the northern United States. In Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet blanketed Scandinavia, parts of Germany, and northern Russia. These immense reservoirs of frozen water contained the potential for catastrophic change. When the climate began to warm, this delicate balance was destabilized, setting the stage for a global hydrological disaster. Paleoclimatologists studying ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica have discovered striking evidence of abrupt warming events during this period. Within decades, temperatures increased significantly, enough to trigger rapid melting of massive ice sheets. When such large bodies of ice melt suddenly, the water they release does not enter oceans evenly over centuries. It rushes violently, overwhelming rivers and coastal systems. This sudden influx of fresh water caused sea levels to rise faster than humans could adapt, flooding coastal settlements around the world. The meltwater pulses were especially dramatic in North America. The collapse of the Laurentide ice sheet released enormous volumes of water into glacial lakes such as Lake Agassiz and Lake Ojibwe. These lakes, formed by trapped meltwater, were enormous, larger than modern Lake Superior in combined volume. As ice dams holding them back weakened and eventually gave way, the water surged across the landscape with unstoppable force. Researchers estimate that the volume of water released during a single pulse could have exceeded 10 times the combined flow of all modern rivers on Earth. The resulting floods were not gradual. They were catastrophic, reshaping entire regions in a matter of days or weeks. This influx of fresh water had consequences far beyond North America. When the melted water reached the Atlantic Ocean, it disrupted oceanic circulation patterns, including the Gulf Stream. Normally, ocean currents distribute heat globally, maintaining climate stability. The sudden addition of immense fresh water altered the density of seawater, slowing down these currents and triggering a cascade of climate changes. Regions that had been temperate experienced sudden cooling, while others faced intense storms and precipitation. In some cases, areas near glacial lakes experienced flash floods and violent tsunamis as water surged toward lower elevations. Evidence for these events can be found in sedimentary deposits around the world. In North America, geologists have identified layers of sand, silt, and gravel indicative of sudden high-energy water flows. In Europe, similar sedimentary layers suggest that rivers were overwhelmed by massive glacial meltwater surges. Even in the Middle East and parts of Asia, core samples from ancient lakebeds and coastal areas show sudden increases in water levels, consistent with global meltwater pulses. These geological markers tell a story of unprecedented hydrological upheaval, one that dwarfed any flooding experienced in recorded history. Astronomical factors may have contributed to the timing and intensity of the floods. Studies suggest that cometary impacts or large meteoroids could have struck the Earth around this period, destabilizing ice sheets further. While evidence for these impacts is still debated, some researchers point to layers of unusual materials, microscopic spherules and high concentrations of iridium in sediment cores that coincide with the flooding events. These materials, often associated with extraterrestrial impacts, could have triggered localized melting and intensified existing glacial collapse. Even without a direct impact, minor disruptions to the Earth's climate system at such a critical time could have magnified the effects of warming and melting, turning a gradual process into a catastrophic event. One of the most dramatic effects of the flood was the sudden rise of global sea levels. Estimates suggest that in some regions, water levels may have increased by more than 100 meters in just a few centuries, and possibly much faster in localized areas. Coastal plains were submerged, and humans living along these areas were forced to abandon settlements and migrate inland. Archaeological evidence from submerged sites off the coasts of India, Japan, and Europe suggests that entire communities disappeared beneath the rising seas. In some cases, the remains of dwellings, tools, and even skeletal remains have been preserved underwater, providing a chilling glimpse into the human impact of these floods. The human response to these floods was one of rapid adaptation and migration. Communities that once relied on river systems for sustenance had to find new sources of food and shelter. Some groups moved inland, establishing new settlements on higher ground. Others may have crossed land bridges exposed by lower sea levels before the floodwaters surged, only to find these paths submerged later. This period of upheaval likely contributed to the diffusion of technological innovations, as displaced populations encountered new environments and exchanged knowledge. Tools, agricultural practices, and cultural traditions may have spread more widely during this time due to the forced mobility of humans. Beyond the immediate human impact, the floods reshaped the physical geography of the world. River systems were rerouted, coastal features were erased, and new lakes formed in areas where glacial retreat created depressions in the landscape. These changes had long-lasting effects on ecosystems. Plants and animals were forced to adapt to new conditions or perish. In some regions, the floods may have created temporary inland seas, altering climate patterns locally and contributing to further ecological disruption. The resulting changes in habitats influenced the distribution of species, some of which would survive to modern times, while others disappeared forever. One particularly compelling piece of evidence comes from the Black Sea region. Research indicates that the Black Sea, which had been a relatively small freshwater lake, experienced a sudden and dramatic influx of seawater around 12,000 years ago. This event, known as the Black Sea Deluge, may have been caused by the breaching of a natural dam at the Bosporus Strait, allowing Mediterranean waters to rush in. The sudden rise in water levels would have flooded vast areas, displacing early human settlements and contributing to the migration of populations across Europe and Asia. Similar events may have occurred in other parts of the world, reinforcing the idea that the Great Flood was a series of interconnected catastrophes, rather than a single isolated event. The floods also left their mark in the geological record of North and South America. In South America, studies of ancient river valleys indicate sudden episodes of high-volume flooding, likely tied to glacial meltwater from the Andes. In North America, the catastrophic floods from glacial lakes carved out massive channels and canyons, some of which remain visible today. These features, often referred to as scablands, reveal the sheer power of the water released during these events. The scale of erosion and deposition demonstrates that the floods were capable of reshaping entire landscapes, leaving a permanent imprint on the planet. Even in the Pacific region, evidence of ancient tsunamis suggests that the release of glacial meltwater may have triggered massive waves capable of traveling across oceans. Submerged settlements in Southeast Asia indicate that humans experience sudden inundation events, forcing them to relocate or adapt to rapidly changing coastlines. Coral reefs and sediment cores from the region provide additional evidence, showing sudden changes in sea levels and sediment deposition consistent with large-scale flooding. These events, combined with changes in ocean currents, would have had a profound impact on marine ecosystems, altering habitats and influencing the distribution of species. The complexity of these events underscores the interconnectedness of Earth's systems. The collapse of ice sheets, release of glacial meltwater, changes in ocean currents, and potential extraterrestrial influences all interacted to produce a flood of unprecedented scale. This was not merely a local or regional phenomenon, it was a global crisis that reshaped the planet and forced humanity to confront environmental change on an entirely new scale. The evidence suggests that the Great Flood was not a single moment but a prolonged series of catastrophic events, each building on the last, leaving a lasting legacy in both the geological and archaeological record. In conclusion, the icy cataclysm of 12,000 years ago was a turning point in Earth's history. It was a period marked by rapid glacial melting, catastrophic flooding, and profound changes to human civilization. The release of massive volumes of freshwater reshaped coastlines, disrupted ecosystems, and forced human populations to migrate and adapt. Sedimentary evidence, submerged settlements, and patterns of human migration all point to the reality of this unprecedented event. While questions remain about the precise triggers, whether astronomical, climatic, or tectonic, the impact of the floods is undeniable. The Great Flood was not merely a local or mythological event, it was a planetary-scale disaster that reset the course of life on Earth, leaving a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of the past. By the time the Great Flood struck 12,000 years ago, human societies were scattered across the globe, mostly organized in small hunter-gatherer or early agricultural communities. The end of the last ice age had allowed humans to settle in areas previously covered by ice or inhospitable terrain. Some had begun experimenting with farming along river valleys, while others relied on hunting large game, fishing, and foraging. These communities were deeply attuned to seasonal cycles, the behavior of animals, and the patterns of rivers and rainfall. Yet nothing could have prepared them for the scale and speed of the deluge that was about to unfold. Archaeological evidence shows that human settlements were concentrated along coastlines and river valleys, areas that were fertile, rich in resources, and suitable for sustaining life. These locations, however, made them particularly vulnerable to rising waters. Submerged settlements discovered in regions like the Persian Gulf, the Black Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and Southeast Asia suggest that humans were living in densely populated areas that would soon be inundated. In some cases, entire villages, including homes, tools, and even ceremonial structures, were swept away, leaving little trace except beneath layers of sediment and water. The speed of these floods left communities with minimal time to react. While humans could adapt to seasonal floods or droughts, the sudden influx of water from melting glaciers, collapsed ice dams, and tsunamis would have overwhelmed even the most prepared societies. Entire food sources, wild game, fish, and cultivated crops disappeared underwater. In some regions, people may have been forced to abandon settlements permanently, while in others, migration allowed for the survival of populations that would later form the basis of new civilizations. The impact of the floods on culture and mythology is particularly fascinating. Across continents, remarkably similar flood myths appear, suggesting a shared memory of catastrophic events. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts the tale of Utnapishtim, a man warned by the gods to build a boat to survive a flood sent to wipe out humanity. In the Hebrew Bible, the story of Noah and the Ark shares strikingly similar elements: a divine warning, a vessel for survival, and the rebirth of life after the waters recede. Ancient Indian texts, such as the Matsya Purana, describe a great flood from which humanity is saved by a divine fish guiding the hero Manu. Even in Mesoamerica, legends speak of a deluge that destroyed the previous world. While these stories vary in detail and religious context, their commonalities suggest that they may have been inspired by real events experienced by early humans around the world. Archaeological evidence supports the notion that human populations were dramatically affected. Excavations along now submerged coastal regions have uncovered tools, pottery, and remnants of dwellings that date back to the end of the last ice age. These finds reveal that humans were skilled at creating complex structures, cultivating crops, and adapting to local environments. Yet, the sudden rise of sea levels and the arrival of catastrophic floods likely erased many of these early innovations from the historical record. In essence, the Great Flood created a cultural reset, wiping out knowledge, settlements, and possibly even entire regional languages and traditions. The migration patterns that followed the floods contributed to the spread of human populations and the development of new societies. Populations fleeing inundated areas moved inland or along higher coastlines, encountering new landscapes, climates, and resources. This movement facilitated cultural exchange, the transfer of technology, and the emergence of new agricultural practices. In some cases, survivors may have assimilated with or displaced other communities, leading to shifts in social structures and the expansion of early trade networks. These migrations also explain the rapid diffusion of certain technologies, such as early pottery, stone tools, and proto-agriculture, across regions that were previously isolated. The floods also left enduring marks on the natural environment that shaped human survival strategies. Inundated river valleys became fertile deltas, attracting wildlife and encouraging the development of agriculture in the millennia that followed. New lakes created by glacial depressions provided freshwater resources and influenced settlement patterns. Coastal areas that survived the floodwaters became centers for future civilizations, with access to rivers, seas, and abundant food sources. The reshaping of the landscape forced humans to rethink their strategies for survival, fostering ingenuity and adaptation that would define the trajectory of civilization. One of the most compelling examples of early human resilience can be seen in the region of the Fertile Crescent. Archaeological surveys suggest that communities along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers experienced dramatic changes in water levels around this period. Some settlements were abandoned, while others relocated to higher ground. The survivors carried with them knowledge of flood management, irrigation, and agricultural techniques that would later become the foundation for the first urban civilizations in Mesopotamia. This region, already rich in resources, became a nexus for innovation, likely because the survivors had learned to adapt to extreme environmental change. Similarly, the Black Sea region provides evidence of a catastrophic flooding event around 12,000 years ago. Research indicates that the sudden influx of Mediterranean water transformed a previously smaller freshwater lake into a larger, brackish sea. Coastal settlements were submerged, forcing populations to migrate toward the surrounding uplands. These migrations may have influenced the spread of agriculture into Europe, as communities moved to find fertile land and more stable water sources. The Black Sea deluge, combined with other regional flooding events, suggests that the Great Flood was not a single event, but rather a series of interconnected catastrophes that affected multiple regions simultaneously. The technological knowledge of humans at the time, while limited by modern standards, was advanced enough to leave traces that persist in the archaeological record. Stone tools, fishing implements, and early pottery fragments reveal a sophisticated understanding of the environment. Communities developed strategies to exploit available resources, from constructing temporary shelters to creating food storage systems. Despite this ingenuity, the magnitude of the floods overwhelmed many of these early adaptations. The sudden submergence of fertile lands and the destruction of river systems forced humans to abandon their settlements and rethink their strategies for survival. In addition to material culture, early humans left a record of their experiences through symbolic expression. Cave paintings, carvings, and petroglyphs from the late Pleistocene period suggest that humans were deeply aware of environmental change and the forces that shaped their world. Some depictions may represent water, storms, or rising rivers, hinting at an oral tradition that preserved memories of catastrophic floods. While interpreting prehistoric art is inherently speculative, the consistency of certain motifs across regions suggests that early humans sought to document and communicate their experiences, possibly as warnings for future generations. The social impact of the floods was equally profound. Communities that survived had to reorganize, establish new social structures, and navigate scarce resources. The sudden loss of population in some regions likely altered the balance of power between neighboring groups, fostering both conflict and cooperation. Shared experiences of catastrophe may have strengthened social cohesion, as survival depended on coordinated efforts to find food, shelter, and safety. The emergence of ritual practices, possibly linked to water, storms, or divine forces, may reflect attempts to understand and exert control over a world increasingly perceived as unpredictable and dangerous. Evidence also suggests that some early communities attempted to manipulate water as a defensive or agricultural strategy. Terracing, early forms of irrigation, and floodplain management indicate that humans recognized the dual threat and benefit of water. While these early techniques could not prevent the catastrophic events of the Great Flood, they laid the groundwork for future civilizations to thrive in flood-prone regions. Over time, societies in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley developed complex water management systems, arguably informed by the collective memory of environmental catastrophes that forced adaptation and innovation. The genetic record further supports the theory that the floods had a significant impact on human populations. Studies of ancient DNA reveal patterns of migration and population bottlenecks consistent with catastrophic environmental events. Regions affected by sudden flooding show a reduction in genetic diversity, indicating that many communities were wiped out or forced to merge with neighboring groups. This genetic reshuffling may have influenced the evolution of early human societies, shaping cultural, linguistic, and technological development for millennia to come. In addition to reshaping human populations, the Great Flood left a lasting imprint on the landscape that influenced subsequent settlement patterns. Ancient river valleys, now fertile and habitable, became centers for early agriculture and urban development. Coastal areas that remained above water provided access to marine resources, trade routes, and strategic locations. The combination of environmental upheaval and human resilience created the conditions for the rise of civilization as we recognize it. Urban centers, complex social structures, and technological innovation. In summary, the Great Flood of 12,000 years ago had a profound and lasting impact on humanity. It destroyed settlements, displaced populations, and erased knowledge, yet it also catalyzed migration, adaptation, and cultural development. The flood is remembered in myths across continents, recorded in submerged settlements, and evidenced in geological records that reveal the scale and intensity of the event. Humans survived not by luck, but through ingenuity, cooperation, and resilience. The flood forced them to rethink their relationship with the environment, laying the foundation for the emergence of advanced societies in the millennia that followed. The story of humanity in the deluge is one of survival against overwhelming odds. Early humans were witnesses to a world transformed by water, compelled to adapt or perish. Their experiences are preserved not only in the myths and legends passed down through generations, but also in the very landscapes they reshaped through migration and innovation. The Great Flood was more than a natural disaster. It was a crucible in which human society was tested, refined, and ultimately transformed. The Great Flood that reshaped human civilization 12,000 years ago was not merely a consequence of slowly rising waters. The evidence points to a convergence of catastrophic events, a perfect storm in which ice, water, and cosmic forces combine to produce one of the most dramatic environmental upheavals in Earth's history. To understand how such a global disaster could occur, it is essential to examine the geological, astronomical, and environmental mechanisms that may have triggered it. One of the most compelling theories involves the sudden collapse of the massive ice sheets that dominated the Northern Hemisphere during the last ice age. The Laurentide ice sheet in North America and the Fennoscandian ice sheet in Europe were both immense, covering millions of square kilometers. When the planet began to warm, these glaciers entered a period of rapid melting, destabilizing the delicate balance of water stored in frozen form. While gradual melting occurred over thousands of years, evidence suggests that certain sections of the ice sheets collapsed abruptly, releasing massive volumes of water into lakes, rivers, and ultimately the oceans. The release of glacial meltwater was not a uniform process. Glacial lakes such as Lake Agassiz in North America formed as meltwater became trapped behind ice dams. These lakes were colossal, containing enough water to flood modern continents. Over time, the pressure of water against the ice dams grew until the barriers failed. The resulting outburst floods, known as Jökullaups, sent torrents of water racing across the land with incredible force. Sedimentary deposits from these events show massive erosion and deposition patterns, demonstrating the energy released by such glacial collapses. In addition to glacial collapse, tectonic activity may have played a significant role in amplifying the flood. The Earth's crust was not static. During the late Pleistocene, seismic activity was heightened, possibly due to the redistribution of mass as glaciers melted. Earthquakes could have triggered landslides that dammed rivers or caused tsunamis in coastal regions. Volcanic eruptions may also have contributed by rapidly melting localized ice or altering climate patterns through the release of aerosols and ash. Together, these geophysical events created conditions for rapid water movement and catastrophic flooding on a global scale. Astronomical events have also been proposed as potential triggers for the flood. Some researchers suggest that a comet or meteor impact may have struck the Earth around 12,000 years ago, destabilizing ice sheets and causing sudden glacial melting. Evidence for such impacts includes layers of microscopic spherules, high concentrations of iridium, and shocked minerals found in sedimentary deposits dating to this period. While the exact nature and timing of these impacts remain debated, the possibility of extraterrestrial influence cannot be discounted. Even minor impacts could have amplified existing glacial instability, triggering chain reactions that resulted in widespread flooding. The Younger Dryas period, a sudden climatic cooling event that occurred approximately 12,900 years ago, is closely associated with the timing of the Great Flood. During this time, global temperatures dropped sharply, particularly in the northern hemisphere. Paradoxically, this cooling may have contributed to flooding. As glaciers advanced slightly and then retreated again, meltwater pulses were released in bursts rather than gradually. Ocean circulation patterns were disrupted, leading to further instability in climate systems. The combination of cooling and intermittent melting produced extreme hydrological variability, creating conditions for sudden and massive floods. One of the most studied phenomena related to the flood is the Black Sea deluge. Geological evidence suggests that around this period, the Mediterranean breached a natural dam at the Bosporus Strait, causing seawater to pour rapidly into the previously smaller freshwater Black Sea. Estimates indicate that the water level may have risen by as much as 60 meters in a very short period. This event alone would have submerged extensive coastal settlements and forced mass migrations. The sudden expansion of the Black Sea provides a concrete example of how localized geophysical changes could contribute to a broader, interconnected flood system. The Persian Gulf region also offers clues about ancient flooding. Archaeological surveys indicate that settlements once existed in areas now submerged beneath the Gulf. The rising waters were likely a combination of glacial meltwater entering the oceans and regional tectonic shifts that altered the landscape. Submerged river channels and tool remnants suggest that early humans lived in these areas before being displaced by the rising seas. The convergence of meltwater influx, tectonic activity, and local sea level rise created conditions that were catastrophic for human populations. Tsunamis generated by seismic or glacial events may have further intensified the flood. When large volumes of water are suddenly displaced, either by an earthquake, landslide, or glacial collapse, massive waves radiate outward, traveling thousands of kilometers across oceans. Coastal settlements were particularly vulnerable. Evidence from Southeast Asia, the Mediterranean, and South America suggests that early humans experienced these sudden waves, leaving behind submerged villages, disrupted sediment layers, and marine deposits far inland. Tsunamis would have compounded the destruction caused by rising sea levels, creating a multifaceted disaster scenario. The interplay between freshwater influx and ocean circulation is another key factor. The rapid addition of glacial meltwater into the oceans altered the density and salinity of seawater, disrupting major currents such as the Gulf Stream. Ocean currents act as global climate regulators, distributing heat and maintaining relatively stable weather patterns. A sudden disruption would have triggered localized cooling or warming, altered precipitation patterns, and intensified storms. These cascading effects created a feedback loop in which environmental changes exacerbated the flooding, further challenging human societies and ecosystems. Environmental triggers within terrestrial ecosystems also played a role. As glaciers retreated and ice sheets collapsed, the landscape underwent rapid transformation. River courses were altered, valleys were inundated, and fertile plains were submerged. Changes in vegetation and soil composition occurred as floodwaters deposited new sediment layers and reshaped terrain. Wildlife migration patterns were disrupted, causing some species to vanish while others adapted to new habitats. For humans reliant on hunting and foraging, these environmental shifts posed immediate survival challenges, forcing rapid adaptation and migration. Evidence from ice cores, sedimentary layers, and geological surveys supports the notion that the Great Flood was not a singular event, but a series of catastrophic pulses. Multiple outburst floods, regional tsunamis, tectonic disruptions, and possibly extraterrestrial impacts may have acted in concert to produce the largest hydrological crisis of the late Pleistocene. The magnitude of these events exceeds anything recorded in human history and provides a scientific basis for the flood myths preserved across cultures. Recent research has also highlighted the possibility of multiple regional floods occurring simultaneously, which could explain the seemingly global memory of the event. While one area experienced the collapse of glacial lakes, another region may have suffered from coastal inundation due to tsunamis or sea level rise. In combination, these events created a shared human experience of catastrophe, one that would be encoded into myths, oral traditions, and cultural memory. The repetition and similarity of flood myths across continents suggests that humans were attempting to make sense of events they could not fully comprehend, encoding them as stories that could be transmitted through generations. The interaction of these catastrophic forces also had long-term consequences for Earth's climate and environment. The influx of fresh water into the oceans, the displacement of sediment, and the disruption of ecosystems altered weather patterns and environmental stability for centuries. The recovery of global systems from these disruptions was slow, allowing the memory of extreme events to persist in the natural world and in human societies. Vegetation patterns, soil composition, and river systems were permanently reshaped, influencing where and how humans could settle and cultivate the land in the post-flood era. In addition to natural triggers, some researchers speculate that early human activity, while limited in scope, may have influenced local environmental stability. Evidence suggests that small-scale agriculture, controlled use of fire, and settlement construction could have contributed to erosion and minor hydrological changes. While these factors were negligible compared to the scale of glacial collapse and tectonic events, they demonstrate the increasing interaction between humans and their environment, highlighting a theme that would become more pronounced in later civilizations. Another fascinating aspect of the flood's causes is the possibility of chain reactions between different regions. For example, the collapse of a glacial lake in North America could have altered ocean currents, which in turn influenced sea levels and precipitation patterns in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Simultaneously, tectonic activity or minor comet impacts in one region could have triggered localized floods that compounded global effects. This interconnectedness demonstrates the complexity of Earth's systems and the sensitivity of human societies to environmental change, even in an era when human populations were relatively small and technologically limited. Ultimately, the causes of the Great Flood were multifaceted, combining glacial collapse, tectonic shifts, potential astronomical impacts, and climatic fluctuations. Each factor alone might have produced localized flooding, but together they created a planetary-scale catastrophe. Understanding these causes not only illuminates the scale of the disaster, but also provides insight into the resilience and adaptability of early human societies. The interplay of natural forces demonstrates the fragility of life in the face of rapid environmental change, a lesson that resonates even today. The study of the Great Flood's causes continues to evolve as new evidence emerges. Advances in geochronology, sedimentology, and paleoclimatology allow scientists to reconstruct the timing, magnitude, and sequence of events with increasing accuracy. Submerged settlements, glacial deposits, and ice core data provide tangible evidence of the disaster, while flood myths offer a cultural perspective on human experience. By combining geological, astronomical, and archaeological data, researchers are beginning to piece together a coherent narrative of the forces that reshaped the world 12,000 years ago. The conclusion is clear: the Great Flood was not a myth born purely of imagination. It was a real catastrophic event caused by a combination of environmental, geological, and possibly astronomical factors. Its magnitude challenged human survival, reshaped the planet's geography, and left a legacy encoded in both natural evidence and human memory. The events of this period remind us of the immense power of natural forces and the vulnerability of human societies to sudden change. By studying these causes, we gain a deeper appreciation of the delicate balance between humanity and the environment, a balance that has been tested throughout history and continues to be relevant in the modern world. When the waters of the Great Flood finally began to recede, the world that emerged was both familiar and utterly transformed. Landscapes had shifted dramatically. Coastlines were redrawn, river valleys submerged, and fertile plains replaced with swamps or new lakes. Humans, forced to confront the devastation, faced a planet that demanded resilience, innovation, and adaptation. The aftermath of this cataclysm not only reshaped the Earth physically, but also defined the trajectory of human civilization for millennia to come. The first challenge was sheer survival. Entire populations had been displaced and food sources disrupted. Communities that had relied on predictable seasonal cycles for hunting, fishing, and early agriculture found themselves in unfamiliar terrain. With familiar rivers, lakes, and coastal areas gone or radically altered, humans had to identify new sources of sustenance. Archaeological evidence from post-flood settlements shows a remarkable shift in subsistence strategies. In many regions, humans transitioned from strict reliance on large game hunting to more diverse diets that incorporated fish, shellfish, and a wider variety of plant foods. Coastal migration and the exploration of inland freshwater systems became vital for survival. The process of migration was both a necessity and a catalyst for cultural evolution. Displaced populations moved to higher ground, inland valleys, or previously uninhabitable regions now rendered hospitable by retreating waters. This migration facilitated the exchange of knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices between communities that might otherwise have remained isolated. Tools, agricultural techniques, and social practices diffused rapidly during this period. In essence, the flood acted as both a destructive force and a driver of innovation, forcing humans to adapt in ways that would shape future civilizations. Settlement patterns after the flood reveal strategic choices aimed at reducing vulnerability to future disasters. Humans established communities on higher terrain near reliable freshwater sources and in locations that offered natural protection from potential floods. Archaeologists studying post-flood settlements in regions such as Mesopotamia, the Black Sea Basin and Southeast Asia have identified a consistent preference for elevated sites, often with natural barriers like hills or ridges. This strategic adaptation demonstrates an early understanding of environmental risk management, which would later evolve into the sophisticated flood control systems of ancient civilizations. One of the most significant consequences of the flood was its influence on early urban development. As humans consolidated into safer, more sustainable locations, larger and more complex settlements began to emerge. The Fertile Crescent, previously affected by glacial meltwater and sea level rise, became a hub for agricultural innovation. Communities experimented with irrigation, crop rotation, and storage techniques to ensure food security. The lessons learned from surviving catastrophic flooding informed the development of early urban planning, water management, and social organization. In effect, the Great Flood catalyzed the foundations of civilization. The impact of the flood on mythology, religion, and cultural memory was profound and enduring. As survivors recounted the events, stories of massive inundation, divine intervention, and survival were passed down through generations. These narratives, often embedded in myth and oral tradition, provided a framework for understanding human vulnerability and the relationship between humans and the natural world. Flood myths such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, Noah's Ark, and Manu's survival in the Matsya Purana likely reflect these collective experiences. While the details of each story vary, the underlying theme is universal. A powerful force of water reshaping the world and the human response of resilience and renewal. In addition to myth and culture, the flood had tangible effects on the environment that shaped long-term human adaptation. Sediment layers deposited by catastrophic floods created fertile soils in river valleys and coastal plains. These enriched lands became centers of agriculture and early urbanization. In many regions, the floodwaters left behind natural irrigation systems, new lakes, and replenished aquifers that supported human settlement for generations. The ecological reset created opportunities for both humans and wildlife, enabling new ecosystems to develop in the altered landscapes. The genetic impact of the flood on human populations is also notable. Studies of ancient DNA indicate population bottlenecks during this period, suggesting that many communities were wiped out or forced to merge with others. These demographic shifts had lasting effects on the genetic diversity of human populations, influencing everything from disease resistance to the spread of cultural traits. The survivors, having endured one of the most catastrophic natural events in human history, carried forward not only their genetic legacy, but also the collective knowledge and adaptive strategies required to thrive in a transformed world. Technological innovation accelerated in the post-flood era as humans adapted to new environmental conditions. Tools were refined for both hunting and agriculture, and construction techniques evolved to create more resilient shelters capable of withstanding environmental hazards. In regions like Mesopotamia, early irrigation systems allowed communities to manage water more effectively, reducing vulnerability to both drought and subsequent flooding. These innovations highlight the intimate relationship between environmental challenges and human ingenuity. Necessity drove creativity, and survival demanded solutions. the flood also played a role in shaping social structures and governance. Displacement and migration created pressures that necessitated cooperation, coordination, and resource management. Communities that could organize effectively to manage food, water, and shelter were more likely to survive and thrive. These pressures may have contributed to the emergence of hierarchical structures, leadership roles, and social norms designed to maintain order and ensure collective survival. In this sense, the Great Flood was not merely a physical event, but a social crucible, forging the organizational foundations of future civilizations. Archaeological evidence from post-flood settlements reveals the extent of these adaptations. In the Levant, for example, sites dating to just after the flooding show organized layouts, communal storage facilities, and specialized structures for water management. Similar patterns are observed in early European and Asian settlements, where elevated platforms, drainage systems, and terracing suggest a conscious effort to mitigate environmental risks. These developments demonstrate that humans did not simply survive the flood, they learned from it, using experience to improve resilience and ensure long-term stability. The psychological impact of the flood must also be considered. Experiencing such catastrophic events would have shaped human perception of the natural world, influencing rituals, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. Water became a symbol of both destruction and renewal, reflected in ceremonies, myths, and moral teachings. Stories of survival, divine warning, and the rebirth of humanity provided not only explanation but also guidance, ensuring that knowledge of environmental risks was preserved and transmitted across generations. As human societies stabilized, trade and communication networks expanded, partly as a response to the challenges imposed by the flood. Communities that had been displaced sought alliances, exchanged knowledge, and shared resources to reduce vulnerability. Early trade routes developed along newly navigable rivers and overland paths connecting inland settlements. The redistribution of populations fostered cultural exchange, technological diffusion, and the spread of agricultural practices, contributing to the emergence of increasingly interconnected human networks. The long-term ecological consequences of the flood also shaped human development. New river systems, lakes, and coastlines provided habitats for plants and animals that humans relied upon for food, clothing, and tools. The dynamic landscapes created by floodwaters required continuous observation, experimentation, and adaptation. Human survival depended on an intimate understanding of environmental patterns, seasonal cycles, and resource availability. This ecological literacy, born out of necessity, formed the basis for the sophisticated environmental management practices observed in early civilizations. In addition to environmental and technological changes, the flood influenced the trajectory of language and culture. Displaced populations often merged with other communities, resulting in linguistic blending, shared traditions, and the creation of new cultural identities. Oral histories preserve the memory of the flood, while myth, legend, and storytelling ensured that the lessons of resilience, adaptation, and cooperation were passed down. These narratives serve both as warnings and as frameworks for understanding human vulnerability in the face of natural forces. One striking consequence of the flood was the acceleration of urbanization in certain regions. Areas that offered protection, fertile land, and access to water became hubs of post-flood settlement. In Mesopotamia, for example, cities such as Eridu and Ur emerged in fertile river valleys, taking advantage of enriched soils left by previous floods. These early urban centres became focal points for administration, trade, and cultural development. The experience of catastrophic flooding may have contributed to a heightened emphasis on planning, infrastructure, and social organisation, laying the groundwork for future empires. The flood's legacy is not limited to human society. It also reshaped the natural world in ways that endure today. Sedimentary deposits, altered river courses, and submerged landscapes provide a geological record of the event, while genetic and archaeological evidence documents its impact on human populations. Understanding these consequences allows us to reconstruct the flood's timeline, assess its magnitude, and recognize the resilience of life in the face of extreme environmental challenges. By studying this history, modern societies gain insight into the complex interplay between natural forces and human adaptation. Ultimately, the Great Flood serves as a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. It demonstrates how catastrophic events can obliterate existing systems while simultaneously creating conditions for innovation, adaptation, and cultural development. Humans survive not merely by chance, but through ingenuity, cooperation, and the ability to learn from environmental extremes. The flood shaped human history, influencing settlement patterns, technology, social organization, and cultural memory for generations. In conclusion, the aftermath of the Great Flood of 12,000 years ago illustrates the remarkable adaptability of human societies. Faced with unprecedented environmental upheaval, humans migrated, innovated, and rebuilt, laying the foundations for agriculture, urbanization, and civilization itself. The flood left enduring marks on the landscape, ecosystems, and cultural memory, influencing the course of human history in profound ways. Its legacy is preserved not only in myths and legends, but also in the physical and social structures that emerged from the chaos, reminding us of the intertwined fate of humanity and the natural world. The story of survival, adaptation, and transformation following the deluge is a testament to human resilience, offering lessons that remain relevant as we confront environmental challenges in the modern era.